everyone, and welcome. We do have everyone on mute tonight because we have a very, very, very large audience joining us, which we are so excited about. But because of the size of the crowd, we will have everyone on mute so that we can hear our speakers this evening. But thank you for being with us. We're really excited you're here, and just settle in for a great hour of information on nutrition. So stick with us. We're going to give it a couple more minutes before we start the meeting. Sarah Gentry, can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then our speakers are unmuted. Perfect. Yeah, this is so weird. For some reason it's not letting me let people in, Sarah, but you've got it? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. I don't know what's happening. There's always at least one Zoom mystery at every meeting. This is great. Welcome, everyone. Yes, the meeting will be recorded, and we will be adding subtitles to the recording and editing it, and then we will have it up on our website. We will also email that recording out to all of you. So yes, we will be recording. If you are in the Witness Protection Program, you might want to not share your video. Just kidding, April Fools. No, we are recording though. That part is real. So we'll just take another minute, but we are going to start pretty much on time. So what we're going to do, it's 8 o'clock now Eastern time. I know people are here from all over the world. I had some RSVPs from overseas, which is very exciting. So thank you for joining us this evening. I am going to go ahead and get started because we have a 1 hour time frame to welcome our guest speakers and to talk about nutrition. I'm Laurel Richardson. I'm the Director of Community Outreach for the Charcot-Marie Tooth Association. We are thrilled to have you with us this evening. Sarah Gentry's with us. She does many things at the CMTA, and she's also a branch leader, and she's helping me with IT on the Zoom tonight. So thank you, Sarah Gentry. Just a couple housekeeping items. As I mentioned when you first came on, we do have everyone on mute this evening because we have a very, very, very large crowd joining us, which is incredibly exciting. Obviously, nutrition is a hot topic, and we want to get right to that. We have had many, many questions come in. So we've really done our best, and with Sarah Kevern's help, to organize them into categories. We're going to get through as much as we can this evening. And if we do not get to your specific question, please know that we will either have another follow-up Zoom or perhaps share some information and some articles that will come out in the future. So first and foremost, we will start address when Elizabeth and Sarah begin speaking. They'll address the topics of the questions that came in in advance of the meeting. And if you want to share a question in the chat room, you are welcome to do so. I just can't promise that we'll get to those tonight, but please know that I am taking notes on those, and we'll try to get to everyone's questions. So without further ado, thank you again for being with us. And I want to turn it over to Elizabeth Ouellette. Thanks, Elizabeth. Oh, she is on mute, Sarah.
Okay. Just kidding. Hi. April Fools, how to do something. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. We have 217 and growing. So thank you so much for being on the call this evening. I'm Elizabeth Ouellette. I'm on the board of directors and an advocate for people with CMT. My son has CMT. He's 28 now. Very, very involved in the association. And Laurel and I have been doing these Zoom meetings, which have been very, very popular. And this has been the most popular ever, this topic, nutrition. So I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Kevern. She is a registered dietitian, and she works at the Center of Excellence with Dr. John Day, right, Sarah? You work at the Center of Excellence, and you've kind of built up the program of nutrition in the Center of Excellence, and it's kind of a new thing, right? So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm very excited to be here. I'm so impressed and a little bit intimidated by the number of people tuning in, but also super impressed with the CMTA community in general. The questions I got were awesome. It's clear that you all read a lot and have a lot of really great questions. So I'm super happy to be here. I do work at Stanford at the neuromuscular clinic, where I actually work at the pediatric one as well. And I joined that team in 2019. So we're definitely still building the nutrition part of things, but it's been really great, being a part of that and getting to kind of make it what I want.
So Sarah, where are you from?
I'm from Ohio.
Ohio, and that's where you went to school. And did you find a job out here and that's why you moved?
No, I've bounced around a bit. I worked in Chicago, I worked in New York, and then I'm out here now to be at Stanford. So
And you're
I've
pretty
been
active, aren't you? Like you spend your weekends outdoors and things.
I do. Yes. Super outdoorsy. It's been amazing to be in the West where it's, great weather. I can get out all year round. So
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And so let's get started. So, CMT is a neuromuscular disease. So what role does nutrition play in neuromuscular diseases in general? Does it make a difference?
yeah, so that's a great question. And I've learned a lot about that in the last 2 years. I do want to definitely emphasize that nutrition will never cure or stop any kind of disease progression, neuromuscular or CMT specifically. But it can be very, very helpful in managing symptoms. And kind of along with that, poor nutrition can certainly worsen symptoms. So it's definitely worth paying attention to and trying to develop good habits and really optimize your own nutrition, even if it's not gonna, be curative. So I definitely want to kind of start by saying that.
Okay.
And Mhm.
So I was wondering, so, we were talking about nutrition and it's important to eat, nutrition is so complicated.
Mhm.
I was speaking with my doctor and she's like, well, how many servings of vegetables do you get per week? And I'm like, 4. She's like, no, it has to be 4 per day, not 4 per week, So what
Yeah.
is normal nutrition? And with COVID, it's been hard. People haven't been able to get out and exercise. What is normal nutrition? Is there really a plan in the back of what people should and should not do?
Yeah. So, in terms of how we can actually affect sort of the symptoms of neuromuscular disease, there's sort of three things that we can kind of focus on, and those are reducing inflammation, which inflammation is kind of like a popular buzzword, and I'm not sure that everyone actually knows what that means. So I'll just say pretty quickly that inflammation essentially is the body's immune response to some kind of substance. And what inflammation is basically a cascade of chemical reactions in our body. And those reactions can cause oxidative stress or tissue damage, fat deposits on nerves, mitochondrial changes, things like that. So because of those changes in the body, that can cause more pain, can affect nerve health, and things like that. So reducing inflammation is very important. Another way that nutrition can help in neuromuscular disease is helping optimize energy. So I know in our questions, we had a lot of questions about fatigue and energy in general. So nutrition plays a role in that. Getting the right macronutrient balance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then the third one is really addressing any micronutrient deficiencies or toxicities. And I think one of the most popular questions we got was supplement related. So we'll definitely go into more detail about that. But anytime I meet someone with a neuromuscular disease or CMT, I'm definitely looking for any vitamin mineral deficiencies or even toxicities, which is not something people talk about much. It's always like, what can I take more of? What supplement can I take? But toxicities are not benign. So it's important to kind of consider that as well.
Okay, so what should I be eating then?
Yeah. So I think one of the main questions people get is how many calories do I need, right? And that's, your guess is as good as mine. So Nothing about me being a dietitian means that I can look at someone and tell them how many calories they need. It's not that simple. There are a lot of predictive equations online that you can use to estimate your BMR or basal metabolic rate. And the way that those numbers or those calculators or equations are made is by actually measuring a person's metabolism, or a very large group, and coming up with the average. And that's how we make these equations. So you can imagine that they're very inaccurate. It's a major estimate. It doesn't take into account your body mass, fat mass versus muscle. It doesn't take into account any kind of chronic disease, anything like that. So really the only way to know how many calories you need is to measure either your oxygen consumption or your CO2 output. And that is not something we can go down the street and get done on the corner. So that said, knowing how many calories you need is a very tricky question, and I don't necessarily think that should be your focus. So usually what I say to that is, what are your goals? If you're trying to gain weight, you need to eat more calories. If you're trying to lose weight, you need to eat less. And that's really the simplest way to kind of go about that. And
so you haven't really mentioned exercise, and I've always seen calories in relationship to activity, and that changes things, doesn't it?
It does. So exercise is a sort of planned way to burn calories. You're moving your body, you're using energy to move your body, and that burns calories. But your heart beating, your breathing, your lungs, literally everything that you're doing to stay alive also burns calories. And so our metabolism, and that word basically means, how our body uses energy or uses food and turns it into energy. Our metabolism is made up of all of those bodily processes plus exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are trying to lose weight, exercise can help you, increase that calorie deficit, which will help with weight loss.
So what kind of food should I be eating? Like, there's healthy, not healthy, people talk about processed food and not processed food and fresh and this and that, anti-inflammatory diets. Like, I know you can't tell me exactly what I should be eating, but what should we be aiming for?
Yeah. I think it's really important to understand food before, anyone tells you the answer to that, because to your point, everyone's nutrition is so different and so individual that you have to figure it out for yourself. And of course, a dietitian can help you with that. But you know yourself better than anyone else. So if you understand food and what your body needs and how it responds to food, then that's going to help answer that question. So I'll just do like a brief overview of what food is and the nutrition that's in food. So we did start talking about calories first. And calories are essentially just a unit of energy that our body creates when it digests food. There are 3 nutrients in food that contain calories, and those are our macronutrients, which are protein, fat, and carbs. And so that's usually the building blocks of our meals, is those macronutrients, because that's where we're going to be getting all of our energy or our calories, right? And so when we talk about how much of each of those to eat, it varies person to person. There's a lot of talk about protein. It's very popular in this country. There's a lot of marketing around protein, getting enough, supplementing it, things like that. The recommended intake for protein is 10 to 35% of your total calorie intake, which might not mean a lot to too many people, but basically it means that it's less than a third of your total calorie intake for the day is protein. One very general and broad way to estimate how many grams of protein you personally need is to take your body weight and divide by 2.2, and that will give you kilograms, and then multiply by 0.8. And that is a very broad, very generic estimate of how much protein. Generally speaking, it's a really good starting point for most people. With CMT, you don't need extra protein.
So that won't build, I would get questions about, can I build
Yeah.
muscle mass with extra protein?
No. So what happens is, and this would be a good time maybe to talk about protein digestion, because we did have questions about collagen, branched chain amino acids, things like that. So protein, it's when it's made up of amino acids. Those are the building blocks of proteins. And our digestive tract can only absorb amino acids. Anything bigger is too big to get through that barrier. And so when we eat protein, we digest it into amino acids and then they get absorbed. And then our body takes those amino acids and repackages them into full proteins and sends them wherever they need to go in the body. So whether it's skeletal muscle, hair, nails, all of those are proteins. So we really have very little control over what our body does with the protein that we eat. And that's really important to remember, because there's a lot of marketing, especially around collagen these days. If you eat, collagen peptides is what they sell, you're going to get all the amino acids that make up collagen, sure. But whether or not your body uses them to make collagen inside your body, we have no control over that. So I think it's important to kind of note that. And, eat a good variety of protein sources so that we're getting all the amino acids, and that way our body has what it needs to make the proteins that it needs. So your question about exercise and building muscle, the way that we build muscle is by tearing the fibers, and then the body remakes them and makes them stronger. And so really the key to building muscle is actually resistance training. So it's important to eat protein after you do resistance training to make sure that your body has the amino acids needed to repair those muscles. But just eating protein and not doing resistance training will not build muscle.
What exactly is resistance training?
So that's anything that's causing, well, I'm not a PT, but it's basically
I think TheraBand, I don't know.
Yeah, so it's anything like weight bearing on your muscles that's causing them to, contract basically against some kind of force. So what's happening in those contractions is you're tearing the fibers and rebuilding them, and that's what builds strength.
Okay, so that's
not
protein.
A PT.
Okay, no, I know, but that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Resistance training is like, so
that's protein.
Protein. Now, what about fat? There's good fats, bad fats, in between fats.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about carbs first, actually, because
great.
Fats will kind of overlap with some other stuff. But carbohydrates, unfortunately, have a pretty bad reputation. In general, most people should be eating anywhere from 45 to 65% of their calories from carbs. So pretty much half of your diet should be from carbs. Your muscles, your brain absolutely loves carbohydrate. It's, one of the easiest types of fuel to use. Too many carbs or overly processed or refined carbohydrates can make you more tired. And so it's definitely important to pay attention to the type of carbohydrate you're eating. We do know that refined sugars can increase systemic inflammation. So there's that fancy word again. Which can, contribute to more fatigue or pain. But complex carbohydrates, they have a lot more fiber, which is really important for slowing digestion, having regular bowel movements, your heart health, your colon health, all that stuff. So carbs are important, but the type of carb is important as well. And I should probably pause and make sure everybody knows, food sources of these macronutrients.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like, everybody says carbs and I think pasta. That's about it. What are complex carbs versus non-complex carbs, and good ones versus not great?
Yeah, so I'll just mention quickly protein sources. So it's definitely all of the animal products. So meat, poultry, turkey, fish, pork, anything like that, eggs, and then the plant sources like edamame or soy products, lentils, beans, nuts and seeds. Dairy is also a protein source. I think I covered them all. And so there was one person that had a question about a vegan diet. And it's absolutely possible to get enough protein. It's absolutely possible to get all of the amino acids as a vegan. You just have to eat a variety of sources. So yeah, that's a popular misconception. And then carbohydrates, there are three main groups. So the starches or grains, and that would include, any of the cereal grains like wheat, barley, oats, rye, corn, rice, all those grains. And then potatoes fit into that as well. And then we have the fruit group. So all fruit has carbohydrate naturally in it.
Okay.
And then the dairy group. So all dairy products have carbohydrate. So when we talk
Okay.
about more simple versus complex carbs, the simple carbohydrates are generally more processed. They've had the fiber stripped away. A lot of the naturally occurring fats and proteins and grains are stripped out. So the less processed, the better in terms of getting complex carbs. And obviously anything, any kind of sugary sweetener, including the natural ones like honey, maple syrup, agave, white sugar, all of those are simple carbs.
Okay.
So hopefully everybody is on the same page with that. And then, so we can talk about fat next. Fat is super important for nerve health. So it used to be, fat used to have a pretty bad reputation a while ago, and thankfully it's made a resurgence because it is really important. But the myelin sheaths on our nerves are about 70% fat. So it's definitely important for nerve health. The type of fat is extremely important. So when we talk about inflammation, more pro-inflammatory foods are fats. And a lot of anti-inflammatory foods are healthy fats. So it's definitely important to pick and choose where your fats are coming from. And so in terms of the more pro-inflammatory ones to avoid, it's the saturated and trans fats, and then omega-6 fats, which usually surprises a lot of people. But omega-6s are basically most vegetable oils. And they're just more pro-inflammatory.
Huh.
And
Okay.
yeah. So, and the word is usually polyunsaturated, is usually omega-6.
Okay. And so what should I be? I mean, what are the good fats? I want my inflammation to go down.
Yeah. So the good ones are the omega-3s, or monounsaturated. And that's things like the fatty cold water fishes like mackerel, halibut, sardines, salmon, avocado, walnuts, olive oil, flax, to name a few. Those are the major ones that are higher in omega-3s. So those are definitely the ones to emphasize.
Okay.
Yeah. So fat's really important is basically the bottom line.
So, a lot of people talk about is it keto or keto diet? Keto diet. I see a lot of discussion about that. And that's carb restricted diet, right? What do you think? A lot of people really have a lot of success to that and they like it. And I was just wondering what you thought of that kind of diet.
Yeah. So a keto diet is extremely low carb, like I think below 10%. And it essentially, it basically causes the production of ketone bodies, which your body uses for energy instead of carbs. So in order to truly be in ketosis, you have to really stick to that, extremely low carb. And as soon as you eat carbs again, then your body sort of switches out of that ketosis. The reason people like this diet is because it's very, very effective for weight loss. I will tell you it is.
Okay.
But it is not really effective long-term. So it's the people that it is effective for long-term are the ones that can stick to it forever. Because essentially, as soon as you start eating carbs again, you'll probably put a lot of that weight back on.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's also not something I would necessarily recommend for somebody with a chronic illness, just because there are a lot more factors at play. So especially with CMT and really any neuromuscular disease, it's really important to have, adequate carbohydrates for your muscles. Putting additional strain on the body is not necessarily something that we want to be doing. So we are used to, our human bodies are used to processing carbohydrates and using them for energy. So I don't recommend a keto diet. I do know people who find that they have, they're more tired if they eat a lot of carbs, and that's a totally different story. So, if you want like a 30% carbohydrate diet because you feel better, that's fine. But I definitely don't recommend that for everybody. It really depends on how you feel, at your best.
And so that leads me to the question. So, a lot of people ask me about intermittent fasting also. That seems like it would cause, according to what you just said, stress on the body too. Is that true?
Yes. So similarly, intermittent fasting is usually used for weight loss. And it's kind of just another strategy to eat less during the day. So if you kind of have, a limited window of time that you're eating, you're just kind of inherently going to eat less. And so that's going to promote weight loss.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there is some research. Somebody had asked a question about, I think it was fasting for longevity. And it's very true that there are studies that show improved longevity with intermittent fasting. And I I caution this approach for a couple of reasons. First of all, you have to be really careful who you're talking to about this, because it can really trigger a lot of disordered eating that kind of stems from essentially, over restriction or orthorexia type behaviors that are more harmful long term and can actually negate the longevity benefits. So if you're kind of not living your life, not having the social aspect or the enjoyment of eating, that's also harmful. So it's definitely important to kind of I don't know, approach that diet with caution. And then again, in terms of CMT, it's important that you're not, fasting for more than 16 hours. That's a long time to not be giving your body energy.
Right.
So again, it's definitely not a one size fits all.
So you also spoke about micronutrients. What the heck is a micronutrient?
Yeah, so we talked about the macros, which are the ones that have calories. And then the micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. So they don't have calories, but they're still really important. And they're really best to come from food. And the reason I say that is because they do sort of interact with other components in our food, like phytonutrients and things like that can help with absorption and that work together to function in the body. So, supplements can be helpful in certain situations, but they're essentially just vitamins and minerals that have been isolated from food.
So what I don't get is you mentioned protein, fat, and carbs. Where are my vegetables here? What do you call those?
Yes. So when we talk about like building a meal, we usually talk about the macros, right? So we talk about like, what meat am I going to have on my plate? Should I have pasta or potatoes with it? And then we kind of fill in the blanks from there, right? So what I like to say is adding color to the plate is where you get the micronutrients. So we've already figured out the macros. We've got like our main pieces of our meal. And then once you start adding color, you're starting to add those micronutrients. So the fruits and veggies are where we get all those really great vitamins and minerals, the fiber, all the other stuff that's not categorized.
Okay. All right.
So that's how I like to tell people to build a meal.
So how many like servings of vegetables do you think that people should have? Is it 3 a day or 4 a day or?
So it's about 4 to 6 of fruits and veggies. So they're pretty similar in terms of vitamins and minerals, which is why we say, have either or. The biggest difference is that fruits have carbs, so they're going to have more calories than vegetables. And that comes into play if you're trying to lose weight or watch your calories or something like that. But the variety is important because they do all have different micronutrients. And so if you're kind of mixing it up and having, different types, different combinations at your meals, then you're going to be sure to get everything you need.
Okay. All right. So are there supplements I should be taking in, for people with CMT? Are there supplements, and are there supplements to be avoided, and are they all regulated by the FDA? And how do I know which brand? And I could keep going.
Oh man, that's a lot of questions. Yeah. So, supplements. So if there's definitely no, supplement that you have to take with CMT. There's not a specific one that's going to help you in, a specific way that we know of. There are several that have been studied, some that have shown benefits in rat models, but not necessarily in human models. So we'll kind of go through some of those specific ones. But the bottom line is that you really cannot out supplement a bad diet. You just can't. It doesn't work that way. Food really kind of interacts with, there's just so many components in food that get stripped away when we make supplements, that kind of affects how your body uses them. And so it's definitely important to emphasize, creating good habits and really improving your diet instead of being reliant on supplements. So I definitely want to kind of lay that groundwork before we talk about them. But so a couple of your questions. So they are not regulated by the FDA. If you think about sort of the rigorous processes that medications go through before they're on the market, where we know absolutely everything about them. We know the side effects. We know exactly how they work. We know what other things should be avoided when taking them. The supplements do not go through that process. So there's a lot that we don't know about what's in the pill we're taking. So even pill to pill in the same bottle can have different, quantities of that vitamin. So it's really important to definitely get a brand that's had third-party testing, because, it's not required to put that supplement on the shelf. And it's important to make sure that, none of the ones you're taking interact with any of your medications, things like that. So there's supplements are not benign. It's important to kind of recognize that.
So how do you know what's been third-party tested? Is there a website that you would recommend that I can go up and look up my vitamin or?
Yeah, so I think USP is one of the main ones, one of the third-party testing groups. And I think they list all of the brands that they've certified. So usually what I recommend is that you aren't taking like a generic store brand, because most of those don't have a third-party test mark on them. So generally speaking, you want to make sure you're getting a reputable brand that you've heard of. You can even look up and see if it's had third-party testing. Okay. Because it's possible that what you're taking just doesn't have anything in it that's effective. So
right. It's always a risk, right?
Yeah.
So now, we also talked about things that are harmful. Are there any supplements, like there's been a lot of controversy about B6, and is that really bad for you? And how much can you take? And other neurotoxic vitamins for people with CMT or nerve dysfunction?
Yeah. So the B vitamins are pretty popular. They do play a pretty important role in metabolism. They're coenzymes for a lot of chemical reactions in our bodies. So they're definitely important. There was a lot of questions about B6 specifically, or pyridoxine is the word for that vitamin, or the name. B6 toxicity is possible, which is pretty rare with B vitamins just because they're water soluble and your body doesn't store them very well. But B6 it's very possible to reach toxic levels, and it can actually cause neuropathy. So that's, one of the main reasons that there's caution about it. Generally speaking, over 200 milligrams a day is what's required for toxicity. If you have some kind of deficiency or you have to supplement for some reason, generally 25 to 50 milligrams is safe for that. So it's definitely important how much you're taking, but I will say that, getting your B vitamins from food will kind of eliminate that risk. So if you can, dairy is high in B6, fish, greens, any fortified foods like cereal is high in B6 as well. So it's usually safer to get it from food.
Okay, all right. So I just saw a question pop up on the screen, and this has been controversial also. At one point in time, the CMTA was getting advice, it was a long time ago, that people with CMT or neuromuscular disease should not drink alcohol. And so now we just say, moderation. If you drink too much, it can cause neuropathy, obviously. But what do and those are extra calories, but can I have a drink or two in the evening, or is that going to wreck my nerves?
Yeah, I'm personally fine with that. I think it's an important discussion for you to have with your doctor, though. And it's also important to recognize that, alcohol does have, it can throw off your balance and, things like that. So if you already have issues with that or, gait imbalances, then, obviously you have to consider that as well. I'm a firm believer in 1 to 2 servings of alcohol as part of like a happy, healthy social life, and it's really overdoing it that becomes a problem for
Right,
many
like
reasons.
a lot of everything in moderation, right? That just keeps coming back to me.
Yep.
So thank you for that answer. So my husband had a tennis elbow, and the doctor's like, take turmeric. And I'm like, why don't you just give you Celebrex or something? So what's the scoop on turmeric? Is it anti-inflammatory, and does it really work?
Yeah. So curcumin is the substance of interest basically in the turmeric root. It's definitely been shown to reduce inflammatory markers. So all that whole immune response cascade that we can kind of measure in the blood, it's definitely been shown to reduce all of those. And it can reduce oxidative stress, which can have, like we mentioned before, more neuroprotective effects. Most of that was done in rat models. There hasn't been a major benefit shown in humans. There was a study that showed an improvement in pain, but that was paired with an NSAID. So it's kind of hard to isolate, what helped. But we do know that it can reduce inflammation. So, and generally speaking, taking it is safe. So, I think for most people, it's definitely worth a try, but we don't have any definitive research that shows that it helps.
Okay, and how about vitamin C? At one point in time, there were trials, clinical trials of vitamin C for people with CMT1A, and then they, that didn't really pan out. But what do you think about taking extra vitamin C or?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the turmeric where we just haven't, it hasn't been able to be replicated in humans. So the positive effects, I mean. So, but that being said, vitamin C is one that's pretty safe. So, if you're taking vitamin C supplements, it's not really going to hurt you at all, but you are going to pee most of it out. So, that's when it comes down to like, what am I spending my money on? Is it worth it? Things like that. So, it's a cost benefit analysis again.
Yeah. And now I'm thinking about all that muscle mass and everything. How about protein supplements? Would those help, like protein drinks or supplements or bars or?
Yeah. So not necessarily. Eating adequate protein is definitely important, which, we talked about just for making sure your body's got all the amino acids needed for whatever it decides to use them for. Excessive protein intake is a problem because whatever your body doesn't use, it's going to be stored as fat. When we start talking about supplements, protein supplements, when you're suddenly getting, very high doses of protein, that can affect your kidneys. And again, can lead to weight gain. So protein supplements, I think, can be helpful for people who, don't have a great appetite or, have trouble, just have trouble getting enough protein from food, or if they're, extremely busy or something and, need to take something in between meals. But as, regular routine use, I don't think they're necessary. A lot of them are really sort of over marketed, especially in the fitness world. And that's kind of trickled over into the non-fitness world. So, people that are doing heavy lifting and resistance training probably need more protein, but for just the average exerciser, you really don't need that much more.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's another thing that seems harmless, but it isn't necessarily.
Now I'm going to ask you a question, and feel free to say I'm not a doctor, I can't answer it. Okay.
Okay.
But we get a lot of questions about anabolic steroids. Are you for them, against them? It can build muscle. Usually our doctors kind of want us to avoid them because of overuse or addiction, or what do you think about anabolic steroids and neuromuscular disease?
Yeah, I definitely don't have an educated opinion on that.
Yeah. Okay.
So I will
I thought I'd throw
defer.
it in there just in case you had somebody. Okay. Thank you.
I will actually say that creatine has been shown to be pretty helpful, which is usually marketed as a more of like a fitness supplement to take, to help make your movements more explosive in your workouts, things like that. It has been shown to be beneficial in some neuromuscular disease. So, that's one
That's good to know.
kind of an interesting supplement that, is definitely worth investigating.
Okay. Hey, thanks for that. Yeah. How about alpha lipoic acids? That's
Yeah, so
another question we get a lot, right?
Yeah. That one's an antioxidant. So it kind of goes back to the whole prevention of oxidative stress and inflammation, or, it's neuroprotective, protects our cells and our tissues from damage. So we've seen that it can help or improve neuropathy pain. It hasn't really shown anything on nerve conduction, which is what it was studied for. So, there may be some benefits there, but
For pain, like nerve-related pain, like neuropathy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm just going to go back and say, eat your fruits and veggies. That's where all your antioxidants are. There's phytonutrients in there that you don't get from a pill, no matter how hard we try to isolate it and repack it. There is no replacement for the real thing, in my opinion.
Okay.
So
that's really good. Now, a lot of people have pain with CMT, neuropathic pain, musculoskeletal pain. Is there anything that we can take, nutrition-wise that will help? We talked about curcumin or turmeric, and for pain, how can I adjust my diet to help have less pain?
Yeah. I think it's important to kind of get to the bottom of what's causing your pain. So CMT, a lot can be nerve pain, but a lot of it can also be structural or functional in the lower extremities, either due to compensations in gait, muscle cramping, things like that. So if you can figure out what exactly is causing the pain, it's going to help you sort of tailor what you're doing for it. So if it's more of a nerve pain thing, that goes back to the inflammation piece that we've talked about. If you're having a lot of muscle cramping, usually the first step is to make sure that you're hydrated. So, if you're not drinking enough, even just water, and you're, walking around dehydrated, you're going to have more muscle cramping. And then, whether or not you need electrolytes kind of depends on how much activity you're doing. If you're eating pretty well, if you're eating a good variety of foods that have electrolytes in them. Some people do need to take electrolytes, but it's not like a general recommendation for CMT. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, I hear a lot about cramping, and people are just like, what can I do with these muscle spasms and cramps? And, they used to take quinine, but that's no longer allowed for muscle cramps, and maybe a little bit of tonic water has a little bit of quinine in it. But is there anything else we can do for muscle cramps and spasming?
Yeah. Usually the problem I see that's nutrition related most of the time is just underhydration. So if you're someone that really struggles with that, I usually recommend that you have some kind of bottle with measurements on it so that you truly can keep track. I think we tend to really underestimate how much or overestimate how much we drink. So if you have like a liter bottle or something like that, keeping track of how many of those of you that you drink, you should be getting at least 2 to 3 liters a day. And
Okay,
then,
wait a minute, liter. So how many cups is that? 8 cups? That's what I thought.
64 ounces. Yeah, eight ounce cups.
Eight
Up-
8-ounce cups.
Up
Okay.
to, yeah, up to 12.
8 to 12. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So,
a
or
good
64 to, I have to do math, 96
Six.
ounces.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. I don't know,
Yeah.
Laurel, if you get that much water. I know you drink a lot of water. No, so this is something we have to work on, Laurel.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge issue with muscle cramping.
Right, as she's drinking her water. So, there's a lot of people with CMT, and I don't know how many studies have been on, we still have so much to study with neuromuscular diseases, but with acid reflux, with constipation, with gut issues, do you think people should be taking probiotics? How keeping, less acidic food or, constipation, how do you deal with that? Especially sometimes people seem to are more sedentary just because it's hard to get around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great segue from the water discussion.
Yeah.
Because constipation 100% is a balance of fluid and fiber. That is so important. And if you're short in either category, the fiber side or the fluid side, you're going to probably have issues with constipation. So fiber, most people when they're constipated, they'll just start eating more fiber without increasing their water. And it actually will form more of a plug and worsen the problem. So it's really important to do both. And, we talked about the water recommendation is, 64 to 98 or 96 ounces. Fiber should be 25 to 38 grams per day, which isn't super helpful. Most people don't keep track of their fiber. So what I usually say is making sure that you're eating fruits and veggies and whole grains, beans, those high fiber foods with every meal. And if you're doing that, then chances are you're going to kind of hit that target by the end of the day.
Okay.
There was a question about dairy too with constipation. It definitely can worsen constipation, especially if you're eating multiple servings per day. So that's not true for everybody. So, it's good to kind of just pay attention to what you're doing and how you feel.
Okay, and how about that refluxy and then burping and, does that have anything to do with CMT or?
It's not necessarily a CMT issue. So my approach would be to kind of examine what exactly you're eating. So if you tend to eat a lot of spicier foods, acidic foods, or even just overly processed foods, that's going to cause a lot more reflux. In terms of having a lot of gas, like in your stomach and having burping, that can be, eating too fast or drinking while you're eating can cause that because you end up swallowing a lot of air. So if you try all those things and it doesn't really fix the problem, then, definitely bring it up with the doctor.
Okay, Laurel, I have one more question for Sarah, and then I'm going to have you ask some of the questions that have come in because we have a little, go ahead, Sarah. I have another question for you. Go ahead.
You had mentioned probiotics. So I'm just
That's right, I did. Yes. There's just so many questions in my head.
I know. Yeah. So I think most people's GI issues are absolutely bacteria related. So, we tend to start eliminating foods like gluten gets a bad rap for GI issues, wheat or, similar grains. But I think a lot of times just getting our gut bacteria back on track is the first step. So I'm a huge proponent of probiotic foods like kimchi, kefir, yogurt, kombucha, things like that, where we're getting our natural probiotics. If you don't like that stuff, which I totally understand, then, taking a probiotic supplement is definitely fine as well. But I do want people to understand that it can take several weeks for that to work, for you to notice a difference. A lot of my patients will give up after, 2 weeks because they don't notice an improvement. But it does take time to get that gut population healthy again. That's
really good advice. I've been reading a lot about gut health, and how it's related to everything. It's like our second brain or something. It's a book I read. So I don't know if you agree with that, but it's really important.
It's super important. Yeah.
So Sarah, I love dessert. Now, what's a healthy dessert? Can I like dark chocolate? People are like, oh, you can have a little square of dark chocolate. Can I have my little chocolate chip cookie? Or what, like, what's a, like, I don't want fruit. Like, I have to eat fruit. Is there something like, is it bad to have a cookie once in a while or like every night?
Not bad. Bad is not a word that we use with food.
Okay. Yeah. So I've identified sugar, substances as bad,
Sure.
but
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your tastes. I definitely, I think dessert is great, again, in moderation.
mhm.
Dark chocolate is an excellent option. One thing that I really like to make in the fall, maybe it's my Ohio roots, but I like to take like a pumpkin puree and mix in a little bit of honey and pumpkin pie spice and a little bit of whipped cream and eat
Ooh.
it like that. It's really good. Um, I've also done that with like, I've warmed that up and added like a vanilla yogurt. So it's like warm and cold. I don't know, just get
Is it?
creative.
And I think pumpkin's good for digestion, isn't
It
it?
is. It's full of soluble fiber. And
Oh,
lots
I
of
like
vitamin
that.
A. Yeah, it's really good for you.
So do you have
But
references for books or websites for some ideas, just on like, because that's a great recipe.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I just came up with that. I think it's important to get really involved and kind of creative and like get fun out of food, to be honest. And I also think that um, with dessert, it's totally fine to have the real thing. So, it's definitely, if you have it a couple times a week and it's, a good enough portion to satisfy, that's not going to make or break anything. So it's when we're eating those things constantly all the time, in place of, the more nutrient dense foods that we start to kind of run into trouble.
Right. Okay, that's helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, Laurel, are there questions that came in that you'd like to ask Sarah?
Oh, there's so many.
I
Yes,
know.
but you know what, Sarah, don't be overwhelmed because we know we have a certain amount of time and I can go back and read through these and address these questions with people as well, that have come in, because I know we're on a strict time frame. And also you've addressed a lot of these things that have come in, but I'm going to ask you a couple things. I'm going to skip around. If you did address it and I missed it, just let me know you addressed it. I was answering some emails of people who couldn't get in.
Okay.
So one person brought up aspartame, and does it have a negative effect on CMT?
Not that I know of, but I would have to get back to you on that for sure.
Did you talk about magnesium yet? And so some in the CMT community, we talk about a lot about magnesium helping with cramps. But maybe you could speak to magnesium as a supplement or any information as it relates to cramping.
Yeah, it's definitely, it can help with cramping if you're not eating enough of it. It can also help with sleep. So if you're having trouble, with that, you can definitely take a supplement. Some good food sources of magnesium are like your leafy greens. So any green leafy, spinach, kale, any of those. Legumes have magnesium, nuts and seeds have magnesium, whole grains. So it's pretty easy to get from food. But, it's definitely something, if you don't eat a lot of those foods, then you can, supplement it. It's usually paired with calcium and vitamin D for bone health also. So that might be a good option if you're supplementing.
How about topical magnesium oils and stuff?
I'm not sure about those.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how effective they are.
How they absorb into the body, into the muscles. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so a lot of us with CMT, I have CMT1A, we have less muscle mass as our muscles atrophy in our legs and perhaps our forearms. So someone said, since I have less muscle mass, do I need fewer calories? For example, does less muscle mass factor into the BMI?
That's a great question.
A good question.
BMI is a ratio of weight and height. So it does not take into account your body mass at all. Like your, oh my gosh, what's the word? Like the breakdown of your lean mass versus fat mass. So we essentially have muscle mass, bone mass, and fat mass in our bodies, and the BMI does not take that into account. So in terms of calorie needs, muscle is metabolically active, meaning it burns calories much more than like our fat does. And so if you have less muscle mass, your calorie needs will go down. And that also, is activity dependent as well.
But we do have muscles that work. So let's build up those muscles that work.
Let's
which
keep
will
those
then-
healthy.
Then will help. So there aren't any foods that would help us to not lose muscle mass. So the CMT, that muscle loss progression is going to happen no matter what. There's not, but a healthy diet would obviously be our best bet for feeling well and staying active.
And avoiding chronic disease too. So, a poor diet that's not rich in all those, important nutrients we talked about, and being, excessively overweight or sedentary, those things all can lead to chronic disease. And what I mean by that is, like the heart disease, cancers, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank, diabetes. And so, avoiding all of those is extremely important as well, right? So there's so many reasons to take care of your body, whether or not, it's going to help your CMT. So just kind of trying to optimize your nutrition and your overall health is going to, make everything better in the long run for sure.
Excellent. And then did you touch on oils at all, like real butter, coconut oil, olive oils, avocado oils? How are you feeling about those in terms of nutrition and cooking with those?
Yeah, so those are all fats. Let's see, butter and coconut oil are more saturated fats. Olive oil and avocado oil are monounsaturated fats. Those are definitely the most healthy choices in that group. Generally speaking, I mean, I know you need certain types of fats for certain types of cooking because of smoke points and things like that. So it's good to take that into consideration too, because if your fats are burning when you're cooking, then they become more pro-inflammatory. So it's important to not cook with olive oil at a high temperature, for example. And so, if I'm cooking something at a very high temperature, I tend to use coconut oil because it's more stable. But for everyday eating, when I'm, the oils that I use the most would be like an olive or an avocado oil for that monounsaturated fat.
Okay, that's great. We have had a few parents ask questions like, is there a diet that you would be different, or, healthy eating that would be different for pediatric as opposed to adults?
It's super different. And that's just because kids are growing. And so we worry a little bit less with kids about the quality of their diet because we want to make sure that they're growing appropriately on the growth curves. And so usually, if your kid's picky, we just want them to eat, period. So, the priority is a little different with kids. We really want to support growth and bone health and all those things in those really important years. So, that's the main difference with children is, de-emphasizing the quality of the diet, which I think is hard for a lot of parents.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great to know. And then someone said, I take NMN supplements and resveratrol for longevity. Any problem with this and CMT?
NM what?
NMN supplements.
Okay. So resveratrol is an antioxidant, so that one's generally safe. I think the other one might be, I'm going to Google it really quick. Do you want to go to the next question?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Someone's mentioning the Wahls protocol recommendations. Yeah.
Real quick, NMN is a coenzyme, so it's like a B vitamin type thing. Generally, it's probably safe, but not, studied or anything.
Okay.
So Wahls protocol is like a modified paleo diet. So it's low carb. It eliminates, I believe, dairy, whole grains, legumes, and nightshade veggies. Mm-hmm. So it's studied in MS, not CMT. So we don't really know much about, if it's helpful in CMT or not. It's sort of like an autoimmune type diet. So, I mean, I think it's safe. I would rather you do that than keto. But I also think that, you know, it tends to be low carb. So, you know, making sure that it's not affecting your energy.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And as far as you know, Sarah, does caffeine have a long-lasting neurological effect? Positive, negative with caffeine? What are your thoughts?
I'm not actually sure. I imagine you would need pretty high doses for it to have a long lasting effect. Um, but the problem I have with caffeine is that people tend to take it for energy. And we know that calories are energy, real energy, right?
Mm.
Caffeine is just a stimulant, so it's going to be pretty short lived. It doesn't provide, you know, like real lasting energy. So I think it's important if you're fatigued all the time relying on coffee, and you're not, you know, properly fueling your body, that's going to be a problem.
That makes great sense.
Mhm.
And someone asks, you know, how many leafy greens, like how big of a salad? You know, some people make a big salad and it's all fat and calories and dressing.
Mm.
So maybe some guidance on how much of that leafy green benefit, you know, at a meal.
Yeah, so leafy greens, a serving is about 2 cups of spinach, for example. You know, when you cook that down, it fits in your palm. So, so that's
Yes.
why the serving size is so big, because they are full of water. So yeah, the leafy greens about two cups is a serving.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
You know, this has been so helpful in breaking things down. But you know, to really understand, is there any sources that you say? I just find nutrition very, very complicated, and you've done
It
a
is.
great job explaining everything. And there's always a new theory or a new thing out, you know, this or that. Are there any resources where I can just go, oh, what do I need? What can I get? Or do you think I should see a nutritionist for that information for me?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's important to see a registered dietitian, and that's just because nutrition is very complicated. And the main difference basically between a dietitian and a nutritionist is that, you know, a dietitian has gone through a very specific educational path that includes all the sciences and supervised clinical practice, and then, you know, you sit for your boards. Whereas a nutritionist could literally be anybody.
That's good to
I've
know.
had a lot of nutritionist friends and colleagues that, you know, had business degrees and got a certification online. So you do have to be careful, you know, who you're getting your advice from. And in terms of, you know, getting information on the internet, just, you know, checking the sources of that information is really important. Nutrition is super complicated. The research is very difficult to conduct, which is why it takes forever. So, you know, it's important to kind of, you know, really, really read carefully where your information's coming from.
I can't thank you enough for doing this Zoom webinar. It's been wonderful, and we're getting a lot of great, great feedback. So thank you so much. And I also wanted to thank you for building out this project at the Stanford Center of Excellence, the Neuromuscular Center, because what a gift to our people with neuromuscular disease, including CMT. So I applaud you, and I hope you stick around. I'm glad the weather's nice and you like it.
Yeah, definitely helps.
Laurel?
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for sharing your time and talents with us. And thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. And there will be more to come. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. And thank you, Sarah Gentry, for helping us out
Yes,
here.
thanks, Sarah Gentry. And it will be recorded, so we'll get the recording out to everyone who registered. So thanks for being here.
Great job, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.